Hi there, I'm Patrick Donegan with HardenStance. Netcracker is one of the world's leaders in telecom software focused on the BSS OSS space. The company has just become a member of the Communications Sector Coordinating Council, the CCSC in the United States, which is extremely interesting from a telecom security point of view. I'm here with Bob Titus. Bob is Netcracker's CTO. He's also their data protection officer. Bob, great to see you. Congratulations on being invited to join this august group. Tell us a little bit about the Communication Sector Coordinating Council itself, if you would, to kick us off.
Great. Thank you, Patrick, and thank you for having me. The Communication Sector Coordinating Council is basically looking at how do you make the U.S. Critical communications infrastructure more secure. That includes everything from evaluating new technologies to looking at what should be the security strategy and policies that should be put in place. So it's a coordination across government, telcos, suppliers and vendors in that space to achieve those goals. So for us, it's an important organization doing very important work, given the increasing threats that we see across the landscape.
And it's been in place for the last year or two, or many years prior to that?
It's been in place for a while. Netcracker just joined, and so we're excited to become part of it.
Very good. Now, before we talk about the council itself, let's just, by way of context, look a little bit at the telecom sector threat landscape and some of the major attacks we've seen over the course of the last year or so. We've seen Kyivstar, Ukraine's largest mobile operator, taken down by a huge cyber attack. Millions of Ukrainians without service for days. An estimated cost of $100 million. The entire core network basically wiped. In the US, we've seen a major ISP. It's been attributed to Windstream, although Windstream hasn't actually confirmed that they were indeed the target. But 600,000 of an ISP's home routers, SOHO routers, essentially wiped out, grilled. They had required a complete and total hardware replacement. And then most recently, in the last 10 days or so, we've seen even more disturbing research published in terms of the Chinese state threat actors penetrating the legal intercept portal of some of the major US carriers, with all of the potential national security risks that go with that. So fairly safe, I think, to say that things are kind of getting worse.
I think they're getting much worse, and I think the attacks are getting more sophisticated and more frequent. And if you look at what's happening, it's not just the networks they're after in terms of getting into devices. They're after the data that the network is producing, whether it's the call data records or subscriber information or even configuration of the network and where weak points are. I think the threat actors are becoming much more skillful. I think they're starting to leverage, AI to find weak points. They're starting to steal credentials and try and get into systems and networks using valid credentials that they've phished or stolen. So I think the threats are real and they're increasing. And I think the need to be more vigilant and to improve our security is urgent, and the challenge is there right in front of us, and we see it every day.
That most recent one I alluded to, the apparent breach of the legal intercept portal. What's information is, as is always the case with an attack of that kind, information is patchy. There are bits and pieces. What's the most granular read you're able to arrive at as to what's occurred there?
Well, I don't have any insider information to speculate on there, but what I will say is not all of the equipment and systems in our networks are new and up to date and fully secure. So I think one of the things we need to look at in terms of both security and resiliency is, do we have older platforms out there? are they as secure as they need to be, and what are we going to do about that if they're not? Because all of these systems and networks provide very valuable services both to governments and citizens, and the communications infrastructure is the lifeblood of the economy in our digital world. So we really need to protect that.
But fair, I think, to say that we don't have clarity as to what type of access has been achieved. We don't know if that access is just to view the portal and have some insight into who in law enforcement was tracking who, for example. That's a whole different level of access to being able to tap any American's traffic that the threat actors choose to. They're night and day in terms of their impact. I don't want to minimize either of them, but let's be clear, we don't have an understanding of what precise level of access has been achieved, yes?
Right. So there's two things. We don't have that level of understanding of, how deep they were able to go and
Right.
what they were able to do. I also don't have any clarity on how that actual access was fully gained, right? And I think, understanding that in detail will certainly help us, assess other systems and other platforms to make sure that the same breach can't happen again.
Right. So before we look at your particular role within the CCSC, let's look more broadly at what Netcracker is able to contribute to telecom security. Because at the end of the day, you guys are you're a telecom software vendor. You're not a bespoke, focused cybersecurity vendor. But that said, the direction everybody is trying to go in cybersecurity these days is to ensure security of components, of products, of supply chain ecosystems, security at the architecture level at the outset, so that we can eliminate security vulnerabilities such that when hackers do get into our systems, that we leave them precious few vulnerabilities that they can play with. I assume that's kind of part of what Netcracker contribute to the telecom sector generally from a security standpoint. But elaborate on that further, if you would.
Yeah, so I'll pick on three things. I mean, there's probably a laundry list of things where we play a role and contribute. But the first one I'll pick on is, networks are increasingly becoming software.
Yeah.
And that software is controlled by other software, namely OSS. So as you orchestrate and provision the network, you're changing the configuration, you're keeping records of the end-to-end topology of the network, how every device is set up, how it's connected, and then you're provisioning critical services, circuits onto those networks using OSS software. So if we're going to make sure that the networks are secure, we better make sure that the software controlling those networks is A, secure, and B, communicating securely with the network, and that does not become a weak point in the end-to-end security of the infrastructure. So that's point number one. Point number two, Netcracker is a managed service provider to many telcos where we operate the IT, BSS, and OSS on behalf of our customers. Sometimes it's in our data center, sometimes it's in theirs, sometimes it's in a public cloud. So we see the attacks every day of people trying to get off the data, trying to get at the data coming off the network.
Yeah.
Whether those are called detail records or subscriber information, those attacks are happening constantly. So we see a role there where we have to coordinate with our customers and with the telcos to say, here's the attacks we're seeing, and make sure that we're protecting not only the systems and the operations they're doing, but the data within them. And really the data brings me to the third point. All of this data in the network, whether it's the call records, whether it's the the phone identifiers or the phone numbers or any of the circuit identifiers, all of that data is being pulled off the network, fed into OSS and BSS systems, then being pulled out and into data lakes and data warehouses used for analytics. So all of that data needs to be protected across that entire chain. And those data pipelines are increasing in volume. and they're increasingly a target of threat actors. So I think we play a role there as well.
Right. That second one in the case of what you just described as kind of managed services. I guess you must be operating that in a way that kind of segments what you're doing with one carrier from another. There's got to be an elaborate security architecture around that managed services environment in its own right, I assume.
Absolutely, that's correct. So each customer has their own environments, and we need to protect each one of those individually. And all of those environments are connected back into our customer environments. So those connections need to be secured. And the end-to-end architectures across network and systems and cloud providers in a telco is very complex. And the security needs to be looked at from an end-to-end standpoint, because any weak link can be attacked and exploited.
For sure. So let's come finally then to the Communication Sector Coordinating Council. These organizations tend to be organized in various groups that do A, B, C, D, E, F, G. You're not going to be all over all of those groups. You're going to have a particular contribution that you can make within a particular group, I suspect. What is the specific area of contribution that Netcracker is going to be making to the CSCC?
I think there's a couple areas. One is, certainly as new and emerging technologies come out, how those technologies are operated and controlled. I think that's an area that we will continue to look at. The connection between the OSS and PSS and the networks, and the data that's being passed back and forth, and how the software is being used to configure, activate, in a closed loop assurance, self-healing, self-organizing network world. The role of software is very much increasing its interaction and control with the network. So how do we make that secure, both from a operational standpoint, but also from what guidance can we give to the government and to policymakers to ensure that future infrastructure is very secure.
Well, that sounds like a really good job. Are you going to be able to do that yourself, or have you got to unfortunately delegate that to somebody?
I am going to be involved, but I cannot say that it's all going to be me.
That's too bad.
There's a team approach to this.
Right, very good. Well, Bob, terrific catching up with you. Great to hear the contribution that you guys are making to the broader infrastructure security of the US and I guess its allied partners as well. Very much appreciate your time today. Thanks for showing up.
Thank you, Patrick. Appreciate it.
Thank you.